Controversial films generally acquire such designation and renown because of the way they depict themes such as sex, violence, politics or religion. Luis Buñuel's Viridiana and Martin Scorsese's The Last Temptation of Christ are particular examples of films that have enraged religious authorities due to the defamation of their tenets or history, while The Birth of a Nation and The Triumph of Will showcase how technical masterworks are not exempt from criticism when espousing or glorifying abhorrent political ideologies. Violence and sex are oftentimes related, and shocking portrayals of such mixture is seen in films like Irreversible, Crash, Antichrist, and Salo or The 120 Days of Sodom. However, before the conjunction of sex and violence even had the chance to appear on a screen, there were times when the simple depiction of sex or the mere suggestion of the act was deemed reprehensible or morally degrading, and enough to send audiences and censors through the roof. This video presents a film that, at the time of its exhibition in 1933, was a success scandal for having outrageously dared to show the breasts of a woman, and not only that, but also for alluding to the act of lovemaking, and worst of all, even implying the occurrence of its perfectly natural climax. Let us then delve into this boundary-defying and revolutionary film called Ecstasy. Ecstasy is an early sound film by Gustav Machatý, a Czech film director, and together with The River by Josef Hovensky, and The Earth Sings by the notable Karel Plička, and the short film Storm over the Tatras, the group is responsible for putting Czechoslovak cinema on the international spotlight for the first time. The four productions were awarded with the joint prize at the Venice Film Festival in 1934, and all showcased the Czechoslovak natural scenery in the countryside and its geographic features with a delicate spirit, having all been photographed by Jan Stalich, by then a young man of mere 25 years, but which evolved to be one of the most talented and successful cinematographers of the country. It's worth noting that, after being elected as one of the most important films in the history of European cinematography by the European Federation of Cinematographers in 2003, the jury described Ecstasy's exterior photography as outstanding, full of romantic vision and unconventional shots. In any case, the four films are considered cornerstones of Czechoslovak film history, especially due to the lyrical evocation that arises from the portrayal of the mostly Slovak and Ruthenian landscapes. Ecstasy, however, went a few steps beyond the ordinary storytelling and Auto's stunning capture of the natural setting, with an illustration of carnal desire that appears perfectly harmless and trivial today, but which scandalized prudish audiences back then. At a first glance, the plot of Ecstasy seems rather unremarkable, and its elementary structure will perhaps be hardly persuasive or intriguing enough for most people reading the synopsis nowadays. The film starts with a newlywed couple, a young woman named Eva and an older man called Emil, who very quickly are shown to be rather incompatible, as the passionate woman gets neglected by her disinterested husband, and the two are not even able to consummate their marriage, while very rapidly growing emotionally estranged. Eva refuses to stay locked in such dispiriting marriage, files for a divorce, and eventually returns to her father's cottage, a prosperous horse breeder. After venturing one day to the country with a horse, Eva meets a young road construction worker named Adam, therefore forming a rather evident replication of Eden-like innocence from their names, and from this ride and meeting will emerge the sources of the film's controversy. In any case, Adam and Eve are naturally drawn to each other and eventually fall into one another's arms, but the return of Emil later on is bound to throw their relationship into disarray. It's the classic love triangle device, so thoroughly loved and addressed in plentiful romantic films, whose fascination remains unchanged as of today, regardless of the multiple reiterations. Yet, Ecstasy, while not necessarily an innovative project in that aspect, luckily avoids certain tropes in many areas that have now become clichés and which impregnate the endless Nicholas Sparks adaptations and similarly influenced modern romantic films by displaying a group of sequences of disparate nature and alluringly dynamic cinematography and thrilling montage that turned the film into something quite different from the run-of-the-mill and mawkish productions of the genre, which will deserve further mention at a later stage. As for the actual locus of this exposition, one must address first of all the polemical nature of Hedy Lamarr's nudity, the actress playing Eva, a gutsy and bold decision by director Machatý, whose audacity was unheard of by then. While horse riding one morning after having returned home from her disappointing marriage, Eva is tempted to bathe in a river in an impulsive spate of emancipation, as if inspired by the liberating outdoors in contrast to her previous emotionally captive condition. Unfortunately, having left the dress on her mare, she is deprived of her attire when the animal runs away in direction of a lustful male horse calling from a corral close by, and is therefore forced to run after her exactly as she came into the world, until Adam spots the mare, chasing and eventually grappling it. Observing this, Eva is naturally caught in an inconvenient situation and hides in the nearby bushes in embarrassment, but Adam nonchalantly and amusingly returns her the mare, marking the meeting of the first time by the film's couple. In any case, throughout this sequence, Eva is seen running naked throughout the beautiful Czechoslovakian countryside, most of the time in wide shots, and by itself this would be enough to raise the room temperature and send shivers down the spines of most members of the audience at the time, even though her physiognomy is hardly discernible in such distant visual construct. However, at some point a medium shot fearlessly frames Eva from her chest to the top of her head, hence audaciously fulfilling the screen with her entire upper body and presenting her feminine breasts in a very clear and distinct fashion. One can almost hear the resounding gasp that must have echoed throughout the audience at the film screenings at the time and the clamor that surely followed. As if that wasn't enough, Ecstasy goes beyond the innocent display of the feminine body in all its natural, complete beauty, effectively going as far as alluding to the sexual intercourse between Eva and Adam on a later scene. On the very night of their meeting, Eva, while at home, barely contains herself and seems to be unable to get Adam out of her head, eventually taking the decision to visit him in his place of living by the woods, close to where they met. The way this scene is conveyed by Machatý is one of the many examples of his avant-garde approach to filmmaking, particularly in regards to montage and cinematography, and therefore deserves an attentive look. In it, one sees Eva startled at home by the ferocious wind from the outdoors that blows the curtains in her room, as she is then drawn outside by this uncontrollable force of nature that bends the trees and branches in the woods, walks behind the property railing suggestive of domestic confinement in a prolonged traveling, and finally approaches Adam's cabin in a series of amplifying jump cuts of the cottage's window, until finding herself behind his door, from which a dazzling light is perforating around the edges. This is one of the many sequences in the film in which Machaty's brilliance is exhibited in perfect clarity, and that, by itself, justifies the viewing of this film. While inside Adam's dwelling, they are clutched by the claws of passion and both lay down on the bed, with a series of extreme close-ups of Eva suggesting intense pleasure that lead to a climatic reaction, with her pearl necklace bursting midway. While the act in itself is not shown and Adam is seen subtly moving away, the illustration by Machatý is quite obvious, despite the disguising efforts. The fact that Eva's divorce had not been decisively disclosed by then too is the cherry on top of this scandalous cake that so effectively outraged the Catholic Church after a Vatican journalist attended the film's exhibition in the Venice Film Festival, resulting in Pope Pius XI denouncing the film, and which consequently led to no rights of distribution being bought by Italian companies. The film got banned in some countries and ordered to have edited scenes, and in the USA it was found by some censors and religious institutions to be degrading, indecent, morally despicable, and even dangerous for the social stability, in a few instances receiving only permission for exhibition after substantive cuts or limited playtime in art houses, while the state of Pennsylvania successfully managed to ban it altogether. Despite this reaction in the USA, Machatý curiously still happened to find himself hired by the historical American production and distribution company RKO in 1940, which instantly reveals the acknowledgement of Machaty's expertise and reputation as an interesting foreign artist worth an opportunity by his US counterparts. Machatý admittedly expected to be associated with the avant-garde with his work, and he is considered to have been most likely the first Czech film auteur, if one follows the sense given to the term as of today. One has already superficially touched the issue of ecstasy symbolism and creative form in other segments, besides the polemical passionate sequence, but in all truth, ecstasy deserves to be watched and studied by anyone interested in the power of cinema to evoke emotion and to convey meaning through the use of visuals, both through the sheer power of a single meaningful illustration and through the integration of various images in an interconnected system of visuals and sound. The former finds its strongest expression in examples such as when Eva puffs the bee away from the flower given by Adam, or when one observes the figure of Eva dissolving into Adam during their first kiss, or when Emil, Eva's former husband, despondently enclosed in the hotel room, finds a parallel in the house flies fatally caught on flypaper. Scenes such as these all portray meaning without direct reference, in this case respectively inducing thoughts of emancipation, romantic surrender, and inevitability. The latter form of cinematic operation, however, is present in various sequences of technical brilliance, one of the most stunning being the lyrical capture of the outdoors in which Eva and Adam are enveloped during their first meeting, that showcases nature almost with impressionistic sensibility, and which immediately brings to mind the poetical achievement by Dovzhenko in his 1930 masterpiece Earth, explored in a previous video on this channel. At the same time, the previously examined scene that features Eva's attraction to Adam's cottage, plus the gripping and suspenseful scene of suicidal temptation by Emil while driving with Adam in his automobile, or the final road building sequence that hints once again at Soviet cinema's famous montage theory, specifically Eisenstein's integrative cinematic inspiration, with a POV shot of a pickaxe reminiscent of the sight used in the Russian filmmaker's masterwork The General Line, all bring to Ecstasy a fascinating and exhilarating aura of enthralling artistic ingenuity. On a side note, this last scene depicting a group of men in road works is supposed to be a recreation of the poem Hymn to Work, penned by František Alas, one of the great Czech poets of the 20th century, and together with the romanticization of Czechoslovak's landscape mentioned earlier, an aspect that reveals the same affection and representation found in music by Dvorak, Smetana, or Suk, three famous erudite Czech composers, Ecstasy arises therefore as a genuinely Czech artwork rooted in its unique cultural backbone. Viewers interested in Czechoslovak cinema should also have a look at an earlier video essay regarding Menzel's Closely Watched Trains, a very significant film from the Czech New Wave, also with a penchant for sexual themes, albeit in a much more straightforward fashion, in line with the liberating spirit of the 60s. For more on various film-related content, essays and analysis, make sure to check the channel's previous uploads. As always, thank you for listening and see you next time.